and welcome back to Counterpoints. I hope everybody had a good holiday break. I hope everyone had a chance to read my book. There's going to be a quiz on it at the end of this show.
You're
Are you going to be ready for it?
Oh, absolutely.
Excellent. She had already read it.
I was going to say, I'll pass with flying colors.
Yeah, but we've got a big show today because we have some of the largest and most significant, I think, political and military developments in the war in Israel and now also Lebanon that we're going to get into. At the end of the show, we're going to have a tech guy, Paul Bigger, who went viral toward the end of December with a post where he called out a lot of people that he was directly doing business with, calling them apologists for genocide, telling them, you can keep your money. And we're going to talk to him about what the last 2 or 3 weeks has been like since then. Because I think a lot of people, whether it's this issue or others, have always kind of dreamed of the idea of telling everyone in their professional lives to just go pound sand and I don't ever want to see you again. He actually did it. He did the Tom Cruise thing from that show.
Jerry Maguire.
Yes, he did the Jerry Maguire thing. He's
now I'm worried you're going to Jerry Maguire, everybody here.
Or they did the Dave Chappelle thing at the from Half Baked.
Right, yeah.
Anyway.
You're going to do that too, probably.
One day.
One day.
One day, but you're cool. Yeah.
Sweet. Well, this is kind of in some ways related to what we're all talking about with Israel, obviously, because it kicked it all off. But the president of Harvard resigned yesterday, was pretty clearly pushed into her resignation amid allegations of plagiarism. There was an Epstein story that basically didn't happen. So we're going to break down.
A lot of John Doe's getting called out.
That sounds maybe like anti-news, but we're going to break down exactly why this didn't turn out. The list that was supposed to be released yesterday, everyone was anticipating it, a list of John Doe names.
Why do they keep teasing us with this? They're never going to tell us anything.
It's been temporarily delayed, so we'll stay on the case and we'll kind of explain what happened too. And then Unusual Whales, the great Unusual Whales, heroic Unusual Whales, is out with a 2023 report on congressional trading that, Ryan, honestly, I think should be one of the biggest stories in the country. It is so repulsive. It also goes back to Israel in a lot of ways too. So
members of Congress are still allowed to trade stocks.
Of course.
Like despite them promising we're going to take care of that under the last Congress, despite Kevin McCarthy saying it was going to be the very first thing that he took care of when he took power, American people gave him that power. He's now trading stocks as a private citizen.
Yeah.
So congratulations to everybody, except for the American people.
It should not go without note that Ryan is wearing his Christmas tie.
That's right.
So for everyone who follows along with the saga of Ryan's ties and Ryan's Christmas ties in particular, it's a nice tie.
Get used to this one in 2024. You're going to be seeing a lot of it.
It's in the rotation.
That's right. It is indeed.
Well, let's start with the breaking news out of the Middle East. Ryan, I'm really curious for how you were reacting yesterday to the sights from Beirut, Lebanon.
Yesterday, we got news that the IDF accomplished its most significant assassination to date of a top Hamas political figure, but this one was in Beirut. Here's footage from the aftermath of that attack. So we're told that Salih al-Arori, who was a deputy political leader in Hamas's political wing, was killed in that attack. He had been a target of Israel's for a very long time. The U.S. had him on a hit list as well. This is the highest-ranking official that Israel has killed since October 7th, according to the reports that we're getting. The fact that it did not happen in Gaza, but instead in Beirut, is creating concern about the spiraling escalation of this conflict, but also from the other direction, raising questions among some people that if they have this intelligence capacity and if this is what they were doing, they would have maintained a lot of global support. Even though this is a political figure, he's connected to the Al-Qassam brigades, rather than dropping 2,000-pound bombs to go after low-level Hamas figures and kill dozens to hundreds of civilians at the same time, with a casualty rate climbing over 22,000, with a lot of people unable to find food all day long at this point. If they'd have taken a more targeted approach, I think they would have maintained more support around the world.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because there have been quotes about precision versus turning Gaza into a parking lot, and there's been completely, I would say, contradictory points being made, depending on who's talking from the Israeli government, about whether the goal is to turn Gaza into a parking lot or whether the goal is precision, the precision versus parking lot approach.
And do we have A2 here? Do we? No.
Yeah, okay, so I think we used A2, but
Okay.
here's A3. This is, to Ryan's point, Hamas has informed mediators, so senior Hamas officials that are involved in mediations. They've said they're freezing all hostage negotiations until further notice. There are still dozens of hostages. We don't know how many exactly are alive. That's another difficult thing of all of this. I think it's still north of 100 hostages now frozen in the light of this, in the aftermath of this attack.
And a lot of these hostages are actually active duty soldiers that are going to be much more difficult for Israel to exchange, because exchanging exchanging a civilian hostage for kind of civilian hostages held in Israeli prisons under administrative detention or something like that is an easier negotiation when it comes to trading kind of prisoners of war, like active duty soldiers who were captured in combat. Then Hamas asks for much more significant concessions in order to trade those back. Then there's the complication that because the IDF completely melted away on October 7th for so many hours, that allowed a bunch of just gangs and random fighters to make their way through the fence and into some of these Israeli areas. And so what people are saying is that Hamas doesn't even know where all of the hostages are. And that's a big problem for the negotiations as well, because Hamas can trade the hostages that Hamas has, but you just had some thugs and gangs come in and grab people. And so where are they? And who negotiates for them? All of that in the context of this assassination just blowing up the talks.
Yeah, and we have actually some footage we can roll here of the fallout in the streets of Beirut and in Jordan and other places, right? Yeah, so you can see the protests on the screen here. And if you're listening to the show, you can see a big crowd walking down the street of Beirut protesting what had just unfolded. It's nighttime, so it is probably not too far removed from the event itself taking place. Ryan, then this is all coming in the context of, and importantly in the context of President Biden saying what we want is, kind of a cessation. He might not use that word, of course, because it's so charged, but a cessation of the invasion around the new year. And that's exactly what appears to be on the table in Gaza, that Israel is saying, we are kind of pausing, we're working on hostage negotiations, and then this.
Right. And the kind of the historical path that led us up to this neighborhood is also pretty interesting. So this was in the Dahia neighborhood. To run it back to how you even have a Hamas leader hanging out in that neighborhood at all, you have to go back. You can go back as far as you want, but in the late 1970s, after kind of the PLO is kicked out of Jordan, they go into southern Lebanon, and then Israel pushes the PLO from there up into Beirut, and southern Lebanon. Then in 1982, they invade southern Lebanon with this kind of scorched earth approach to get the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, out of Beirut, because their idea is that we're not going after the Lebanese people, we're not going after the Palestinian people, we're just going to root out the PLO and then everything will be okay, which sounds familiar. They finally agree, the PLO agrees, okay, after so much civilian death, after such a broad assault on the civilian infrastructure in Lebanon, which was deliberately done to kind of turn the civilian population in Lebanon against the PLO agrees with international mediators that they will leave. They will leave. They will get on boats, leave the port of Beirut. They go to Tunisia and other places. The agreement that they got from the U.S. and from other international forces was that there would be an international force that would protect the civilian population. Because they're saying, look, if we're going to leave to protect the civilians, then somebody has to protect them. You can't just leave them at the mercy of the IDF. Right after the last PLO official gets on a boat, the international forces leave. Israel then, IDF carries out some of the most brutal massacres in Israel's history in southern Lebanon. That the names of them ring out today. And so they then occupy Lebanon up until 2000. They leave after kind of a little guerrilla war in which Hezbollah has become like a real force between 82 and 2000 in reaction to this war. Then in 2006, they invade again. And they destroy the Dahia neighborhood so massively that it creates this thing called a Dahia doctrine, because there had been some Hezbollah fighters that were using this neighborhood, the one where we just saw the images from, to launch some rockets from there. And so they said, they came up with what's called the Dahia doctrine. If any civilian area is used by fighters to fight against the IDF, we're going to just completely annihilate in a disproportionate way.
Flatten it.
Parking lot. They're going to turn it into a parking lot. So and became known as the Dahia doctrine. And that's, in fact, what they did. The Lebanese war turned into a disaster for Israel, but also for Lebanon. But you had a lot of people saying that what they're doing now in Gaza is the Dahia doctrine. They're just executing this doctrine. Just interesting coincidence that now Hamas is in Dahia, and that they're bombing the leader there.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And actually, speaking of Gaza, we can put this next element up on the screen. Israel's current plan, according to this thread from an NBC News reporter, Israel's current plan for Gaza after Hamas involves local Palestinian clans rather than the PA, administering areas and taking responsibility for civilian needs, an Israeli official tells NBC News. Israel's government also wants an inspection mechanism on the Gaza-Egypt border to prevent weapons smuggling controlled by Israel on the Gazan side. Israel also wants a temporary security zone on Gaza's perimeter, but has not said publicly whether that would be on Israeli or Palestinian land. All of this is expected to be discussed in an Israeli cabinet meeting at 9 p.m. That's yesterday, local time, the Israeli official says. As Antony Blinken, our Secretary of State, prepares to visit the region, this is explosive, Ryan. Their plan for Gaza after Hamas involves Palestinian clans rather than the PA. This is a total change in the order. And not surprising in the wake of October 7th, but we haven't seen some of these ideas, these kind of vague notions fleshed out into specific policy proposals so far. And what we get from this is Palestinian clans. We get temporary security zone from this and an inspection mechanism on the Gaza-Egypt border. Big news yesterday just on that front.
Right, and what they seem to be doing is just throwing things against the wall.
See what happens.
To see what will stick. And for this plan was immediately rejected by everybody who knows anything about anything. They're like, what are you talking about, clans? You're not having clans. These are like...
Seriously, what are you talking about?
That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
The only way that something like that works is if it's a pretty minuscule refugee camp. And that actually fits in with comments that we saw from Ben-Gvir and Smotrich yesterday, which flowed into then this confrontation with a public confrontation with the United States. So let's start with Ben-Gvir, if we can put up this. So he writes, the war presents an opportunity to concentrate on encouraging the migration of the residents of Gaza. This is Ben-Gvir telling reporters. And he says, we cannot withdraw from any territory we are in the Gaza Strip. Not only do I not rule out Jewish settlement there, I believe it is also an important thing. So this is the thing of saying the quiet part out loud. So when he says the quiet part out loud, Matt Miller, my buddy over at the State Department, he responds, quote, the United States rejects the inflammatory and irresponsible statements from Israeli ministers Smotrich, who said basically the same thing, and Ben-Gvir. There should be no mass displacement of Palestinians from Gaza. Just zero in on that should word, because you also had, let me find this, you had the UN ambassador.
Oh, Linda Thomas Greenfield.
Linda Thomas Greenfield. I have her quote here too. We don't have the element, but so she responded later that same day. She said, quote, in a statement, there should be no mass displacement of Palestinians from Gaza, and we reject the recent inflammatory statements from Israeli ministers Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir. So very similar wording from both Matt Miller at the State Department and Linda Thomas Greenfield over at the United Nations, our ambassador over there. Note the word should. Like these are diplomats who invest enormous amounts of weight in all of the words that they choose. And for them to be deliberately choosing the word should rather than will, there will not be or there shall not be, I think indicates where the United States is at this point and how aggressive they're willing to be. Because what else have they said? There should not be 2,000-pound bombs dropped in large civilian neighborhoods. And Israel's like, okay, maybe there shouldn't be, but guess what? There are. So the U.S., by expressing its kind of opinion on the matter, rather than issuing a directive of what can be done with its assistance, is a huge discrepancy.
Well, and I think it also speaks to what they see as reasonably, or let's not even say reasonable, what they see as plausible. Because let's put the next element up on the screen. This is how Ben-Gvir responded.
This got hot.
Really hot. So you can see it on the screen. This is the translation from Hebrew. Really appreciate the United States of America, but with all due respect, we are not another star on the American flag. The United States is our best friend, but first of all, we will do what is best for the state of Israel. The migration of hundreds of thousands from Gaza will allow the residents of the enclave to return home and live in security and protect the IDF soldiers. Ryan, first, your reaction, and second, my reaction is just, I don't think that makes anybody safer. I don't think anybody's made safer by that point. Like, in addition to just the phrasing, I don't think that's making anybody, what does it accomplish the post-October 7th goal of protecting and securing Israel? I don't think so.
I'm more interested in your take on this because I'm already, baked in on this. And I found it just utterly outrageous that this top official from the government that we fund is going to tell us, publicly to our face, no, that we are going to engage in an ethnic cleansing of this area. Like, it's an utter humiliation to us as well as being just evil. But that's where I am. What I'm curious about is, does he start losing people, who have been more supportive or more sympathetic toward what they've been doing over the last 2 months? So that's why I'm curious what you think of it, but also how people who've been supportive of kind of the IDF's effort here are seeing this, because now it's getting so difficult. Like, if Ted Cruz were here, he'd be like, I condemn nothing.
Yeah.
But it'd be very difficult for him to suggest that this is now a targeted operation against Hamas, and that if Hamas would just surrender, this would be over, when you have Israeli government officials saying explicitly, no. What we're trying to do is get everybody out.
Everybody out of Gaza. Yeah, no, and we can't rule out settlements in Gaza. And
in
actually,
fact, we insist on them.
Right. And so, again, I would probably differ from Ted Cruz and other probably mainstream Republicans on the point of whether or not that's wise. And I think, though, that to your point, what they would say actually is they'd probably come down on the side of Ben-Gvir, because they feel that the Biden administration has been insufficiently supportive of Israel, that the Biden administration's public posture of support of Israel is undercut by all kinds of things, by its support for the UN, by the refugees.
What more could Biden do? If Biden were basically Ben-Gvir's deputy, like, what more could he even have done?
I mean, that's right, because everything that the Biden administration has done, and like, this is a great example of where mainstream Republicans would say Biden has been insufficiently supportive, because we know that Biden was negotiating behind the scenes for a drawdown in the new year. And that's something that people in Israel, sort of hard-right people in Israel, were uncomfortable with, and that a lot of people here disagreed with, saying that as soon as we get, to this period of the new year, this should become a precision operation, which is sort of a tell in and of itself, of course.
Become one. Yeah,
become a precision operation. So I think that's what they would say. It's hard for me to argue that position, because I don't believe that position. I don't buy that position myself, but I think actually that's, Crystal and I were talking about this yesterday. For us to be huge participants in a war where fundamentally we are on different pages, the United States having the president say, two-state solution, two-state solution, two-state solution, and having Netanyahu say absolutely for years, no two-state solution, it's not possible,
right.
One-state solution. And you have billions of dollars of money, but then also munitions pouring into this war effort, tens of thousands of people's lives lost, and fundamentally you don't agree on the end. And it's a very dangerous place to be, because then there's disagreement on some of these smaller points that adds up to a horrifying picture of a quagmire. It's the recipe for a quagmire.
Or a recipe for what they call the peace between the lion and the lamb, where instead of you do wind up with a one-state solution, except it's because you've gotten rid of all the Palestinians.
A dangerous one-state solution, by the way, because you have pushed everybody into countries that are not that far away from you, still very close.
Well, they're trying to push them into Europe and the United States as well.
Still, so Lebanon, like these places are not that far, and that's a
right. And we've seen how that worked out before.
Powder keg, yeah, absolutely.
To read a little bit more from Matt Miller's statement, he wrote, "We have been clear, consistent, and unequivocal that Gaza is Palestinian land and will remain Palestinian land." So there is a will. So give the United States credit there. And will remain Palestinian land with Hamas no longer in control of its future and with no terror groups able to threaten Israel.
But this is exactly like what we were just talking about, the two-state solution. You have a completely different, it's not like Ben-Gvir is just a member of parliament, the Knesset. He is literally part of the government. That's, to have two people on such dramatically different pages at the exact same time, when you have the US as such a huge participant financially and in terms of resources in this war, that's outrageous.
Right, and words don't mean anything if the weapons continue to flow. Like, as long as we continue to enable the military assault, which then makes the settlements possible, and if after that we enable the importation of all of the steel and the copper and the construction equipment and other things that you need to build the Four Seasons Gaza that the IDF will want to construct there, doesn't matter what we say. Matt Miller here says, that is the future we seek in the interests of Israelis and Palestinians, the surrounding region, and the world. If that's the future we seek, why are we funding the exact opposite future?
Right. Yeah.
It raises questions of whether or not that's what we actually seek.
To the point where you're being clapped back at on Twitter by the government that you're backing. I mean, it's, to your point, it's embarrassing, and it should be frightening, even if you are on different sides of this argument. It should be frightening just because it shows the extent to which this war can careen out of control very well. I mean, it's already, obviously, it's war, it's out of control, but could careen into a broader regional conflict. And, you know, we started this block by talking about Lebanon. This is just an absolute powder keg. There's no clear sense of direction from our government, from anybody's government at this point.
The only people with a sense of clear direction seem to be Smotrich and Ben-Gvir.
Right.
Like they have their eye on the prize.
But and they are voices in their own government.
And Netanyahu, like who has done nothing to kind of make anybody believe that they're doing anything other than supporting.
But what does he even think? Yeah, about that exact question. We'll learn more about that in the days ahead. Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.
Help us build independent news and get the full show every morning at breakingpoints.com.